Today, we're going to be taking a close analytical look at the Byford Dolphin incident from 1983. It's a grim story, but one that is absolutely essential to understand. It's an event that quite literally documented the horrifying effects of extreme physics on the human body, and in doing so, it permanently changed the way we think about engineering safety. Okay, so let's set the scene. November 5th, 1983. We're out in the brutal, unforgiving waters of the North Sea on an oil rig called the Byford Dolphin. A totally routine procedure is underway when, suddenly, something goes catastrophically wrong. And I mean catastrophically. In less than a fraction of a second, an explosive decompression unleashes a force of nature, a force that completely defied everything we knew about medicine and physiology. Now, to really grasp what happened here, you first have to understand the world these men were living in. I mean, the North Sea oil boom back in the 70s and 80s, think of it like the Klondike gold rush, except this time the treasure was buried under 80 meters of violent, absolutely freezing water. We're talking about the Frigg gas field. And getting to that treasure, well, that required pushing human beings to their absolute physical limits. At these kinds of depths, you can't just swim down, do your shift, and then come back up. It's not that simple. The time it would take to decompress would be dangerously long. So the solution they came up with was something called saturation diving. This is where it gets pretty wild. The divers would literally live for up to 4 weeks at a time inside this pressurized habitat on the rig, kind of like a goldfish bowl. Their bodies would become completely saturated with breathing gases at the same pressure as the seabed. And the genius of this, it meant they could bypass the need for daily decompression altogether. Just take a look at these numbers. We're talking about an environment kept at 9 atmospheres. That is 9 times the pressure you and I are experiencing right now. To put that in perspective, that's like having over 130 pounds pressing down on every single square inch of your body 24/7. And for these divers, this was just their normal state of life. But for physics, that habitat was a bomb of stored potential energy, contained only by its steel wall. Okay, so to even survive that kind of pressure, you can't breathe normal air. The nitrogen in it becomes toxic way down deep, causing a really debilitating narcosis. So the solution was a special breathing gas called heliox, a mix of helium and oxygen. But this stuff came with its own set of very strange and very dangerous side effects. For one, the helium made their voices super high-pitched, like Donald Duck. But way more critical than that, helium is an incredible conductor of heat. It pulls warmth away from the body so efficiently that without constant external heating, a diver would literally freeze to death in a matter of hours. All right, let's move on to the rig itself and see how this whole setup actually worked. So what you're looking at is the hyperbaric complex on the Byford Dolphin. It was made up of 2 main living chambers, creatively named Chamber 1 and Chamber 2. These were connected by a short little tunnel called the transfer trunk. Now, this trunk was super important. It acted as an airlock for the diving bell, which was basically the elevator that took the divers down to the seabed. Now, 6 men were at the center of this operation that morning. Let's put names to faces here. Inside the system, you had divers Edwin Coward and Roy Lucas. They were resting in Chamber 2. Just coming back from their dive shift were Bjorn Bergeson and Troels Hellevik. They were in the process of moving from the bell into Chamber 1. And then outside on the deck, you had the 2 tenders, William Crummond and Martin Saunders. These guys were their lifelines, the ones responsible for managing all the complex hardware. Okay, now we get to the critical part. The safety of this entire system and the lives of all 6 of those men depended entirely on a precise 5-step manual procedure. It was called the transfer under pressure, or TUP for short. And you have to understand every single step had to be performed in the exact right order. There was 0 room for error. All right, so let's walk through this protocol step by step. First, the divers inside close the internal door to the bell. Simple enough. Second, a supervisor increases the pressure in the bell just slightly to get a really tight seal. Third, the divers close the internal door to the living chamber. Now here's the absolutely crucial part. Only then, after that chamber door is secure, do the tenders on the deck vent the connecting trunk back down to 1 atmosphere, surface pressure. And the very last step, once that trunk is safe, is to open the clamp and release the bell. Step 4 is the linchpin of this entire operation. So what went wrong? Well, it was a catastrophic failure of design. The system they were using was built in 1975, and frankly, it was obsolete. It was missing a simple yet absolutely critical safety feature:
A mechanical interlock. An interlock is just a device that would have made it physically impossible to open that clamp as long as the trunk was still pressurized. It's a foolproof mechanism, and this system didn't have one.
So it's 4 o'clock in the morning. Diver Charles Hellevick is in the middle of closing the door between that transfer trunk and chamber 1. But at that very same moment, out on the deck, before step 4, the venting of the trunk was even started, tender William Crammond released the clamp. And in that instant, the trunk and the entire habitat system it was connected to was still at a crushing 9 atmospheres of pressure. And that massive pressure difference, the 9 atmospheres inside versus the 1 atmosphere of the outside world, it didn't just cause a leak. This wasn't a slow hiss. It caused an explosive decompression. We're talking about a violent pneumatic explosion. There's no chemistry here, no combustion. This is pure, brutal thermodynamic. Almost instantly, the pressure inside that entire chamber system plummeted from 9 atmospheres all the way down to 1. And the air inside didn't just escape. It erupted, expanding to 9 times its original volume in the blink of an eye. And this number here illustrates the terrifying speed of it all. The entire pressure drop happened in less than 1/10 of a second. Just think about that. That is faster than a nerve impulse can travel to your brain. It's faster than the blink of an eye. It's faster than thought itself. The force of all that escaping air blasting through the 24-inch opening of the trunk, it was calculated to be between 25 and 26 metric tons. I mean, that's the weight of 4 huge elephants pushing on that one spot. And this incredible force is what turned the multi-ton diving bell into a projectile. It was fired like a cannon. So that diving bell shot away from the chamber and slammed into the 2 tenders who were standing right there on the deck. William Crammond, the man who had released the clamp, was killed instantly. His partner, Martin Saunders, was critically injured, thrown across the rig by the impact, though incredibly, he did survive. The devastation on the deck was immediate and brutal. But what happened to the 4 divers inside the chambers? Well, that was something that had never been documented in medical history. Remember, their bodies were fully saturated with gas at 9 atmospheres. And now, in a split second, they were subjected to a 1-atmosphere environment. For 3 of the divers, Coward, Lucas, and Burgesson, death was neurologically instantaneous. As the pressure just vanished, the dissolved gases in their blood and tissues violently expanded by 900%. The autopsies revealed this horrific phenomenon, something new to science: intravascular fat precipitation. The rapid, violent boiling of their blood literally denatured the lipoprotein complexes. That's what keeps fat dissolved. This caused the fat to solidify instantly, clogging their arteries and veins. And the pathologists who conducted the autopsies, they used this exact phrase to describe what they saw. They said the blood looked like bubbling butter in a frying pan. Their circulatory systems, their hearts, all clogged with a grotesque mixture of expanding gas and solid fat. Death was absolute, and it was immediate. But the fate of the 4th diver, Truls Hellevick, was even more violent, if that's even possible. He was standing right at the point of the breach. He was the man trying to close that internal door when the decompression hit. The door jammed, leaving a narrow, crescent-shaped opening, just 60 centimeters wide. That 26-ton force of escaping air had to go through that gap, and it acted like a piston. It ejected Hellevick through that tiny opening. He was bisected. The pressure differential was so extreme that his internal organs were ejected from his torso and scattered across the rig deck. And to give you a sense of the sheer, unbelievable force we're talking about, his liver was found perfectly intact, 10 meters above the chamber, dissected from his body by the column of air alone. In the aftermath of all this, the initial investigation was swift and, to be frank, incredibly cruel. It placed the blame squarely on human error, specifically on the dead tender, William Crammond. But the families knew. They knew this was not the whole story. For 26 long years, the victims' families, led by incredible people like Claire Lucas, fought for justice. And their fight eventually revealed a damning truth. The rig's operators knew the system was obsolete. They had even been granted a specific dispensation by the Norwegian government that allowed them to continue operating without the recommended safety interlocks, the very devices that would have made this accident physically impossible. And this really gets to the crucial takeaway. This disaster forced a fundamental, permanent shift in engineering philosophy. Safety could no longer rely on humans perfectly following a checklist. That's what was called safe operation. Instead, it had to be built into the machine itself. That's safe design. The new standard became making this kind of failure physically impossible, not just procedurally unlikely. Ultimately, the Byford Dolphin incident stands as a brutal and permanent lesson in engineering ethics. It proved, in the most horrific way imaginable, that when we operate at the limits in these high-energy environments where the consequences of failure are absolute, safety cannot be left to a checklist. It can't be left to a single moment of human judgment. It must be engineered as a physical impossibility, a law of the machine, as unforgiving and as absolute as the laws of physics themselves.